This video is Ecosystems Ecology Part 1, where we'll be talking about ecosystems for the first time. It's not a new term for you, but there will be some new concepts associated with that term. So, here you have some different trophic levels. Well, first of all, what is an ecosystem? Ecosystems are interacting communities within a given area, plus all of the abiotic factors affecting it. This could be anything from energy to nutrients, temperature, water, not just rocks. So make sure you're thinking a little bit outside the normal rock answer on that one. And so here you see the typical feeding structure of an ecosystem. Consider what we call trophic levels. These are feeding relationships, and they represent the energy flow in an ecosystem. Of course, you have the sun there at the bottom, represent the source of all energy in any ecosystem. And then at the bottom, the green section, that first green section, you have the primary producers. And so what is a primary producer? These are organisms that can perform some sort of action that allows them to make their own food, either photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. These organisms are called autotrophs. You should remember that word from previous lectures. These are organisms that make their own food. And so these autotrophs, they take energy from the sun, they convert it to organic energy, i.e. like glucose, some kind of sugar, or something like that. And then these molecules of sugar are available for other organisms in the food chain. And so next you have the consumers, and you can see there are multiple levels of consumers here. You have tertiary, secondary, primary, in reverse order. These are heterotrophs, meaning that they have to consume other organisms in order to get their energy. They can't walk outside and get energy from the sun. They need to consume something in order to get that energy. And again, they exist at different levels. Primary producers or consumers typically feed on the producers. Secondary feed on the primary. Tertiary usually feeds on everything except for probably like the grass and stuff. So you could go on up even higher than that. And as you can see, all arrows point to this section called detritus. Detritus is a fancy word for dead organic material. So think like leaves and dead animals and stuff out in the forest or whatever. This is detritus. And you have organisms called decomposers or detritivores that eat all of this stuff. And so what are they doing? Well, as you can see again, every organism turns to this, whether it's a tiger or a grass or a whatever, mouse or something. It all turns to this detritus. These microorganisms eat it with the purpose of cycling the nutrients back into the ecosystem. That you can see they're putting these nutrients back in the ecosystem that were taken out by the consumers. All right. And so what do you notice? The chemicals are cycling, but what's not cycling is the energy. Energy comes from the sun, and that energy is slowly, a little at a time, lost at every layer. That's heat. And remember from a previous unit, heat is disorganized energy. It's not very good energy. The organisms can't use it. They can't bottle it up for anything. And so it represents a bad sort of energy. Well, aren't the chemicals lost? Well, if you remember, we have the laws of uh, thermodynamics. The first one is the law of conservation of energy, or conservation of matter, or energy for that matter, which says that energy is or matter is not created or destroyed. It is just transformed or transferred. And so you can see where both are happening. They are transferred from one trophic level to the next, and it's also transformed from usable energy to heat energy, which is unusable. And then there's the second law of thermodynamics, which is this idea of all energy eventually is moving towards the state of entropy. And if you remember, entropy is like disorder. And so everything's moving towards this disorder, lack of good energy. And so every ecosystem is slowly dying out. And the only reason that it's able to stay sustained is because the sun is constantly inputting more and more energy. And so where there is less sun, say like the polar ice caps or something like that, there is less energy available in an ecosystem. Where there is more sun, there's a lot more energy in an ecosystem. And so this idea that energy is lost is what we call the 10% rule of energy. And this applies from one trophic level to the next. Basically states that roughly 10% of the energy of the previous trophic level is available for the next one, meaning that this grass is able to bottle up 10,000 joules of energy from the sun. Notice the sun's worth a lot more than that, but the, the the flower's just not all that great at capturing sun, but better than we are. And so, of that 10,000, the grasshopper that eats the flower is only going to be able to capture about 1,000 of those joules. Well, what's happening to the other 90%? It's a good question. I'll have a better picture in a moment. But what's happening to the other 90%? Well, it's being lost as to keep the organism alive. So the flower starts as a seed, just like our bean plants in the classroom. They started as these little beans, and now they've grown into these big plants. Well, that costs energy for them to do that. And so part of that 90% is used as that. Another bit is used to produce waste and to get rid of waste. And so after waste and after growth and homeostasis, the only thing you have left is about 10% of that original energy that you were given, and that you can give to the next generation. Well, the grasshopper has 1,000. The mouse that eats the grasshopper only gets 100 of that. And then by the time you get to the top, you have very little. And so you can see why there aren't tens of thousands of snakes running around, because there's not enough energy to sustain them. There would have to be 10 times that in mice to sustain the amount of snakes that would be needed to have that. Some areas do have that. Some areas even around here have a lot of like um, upper level consumers like rattlesnakes and coppermouth or copperheads, cottonmouths, but don't see that a lot. So that brings up this idea of primary production. Primary production. And primary production refers to the total amount of solar energy converted to chemical energy by photosynthesis. And so going back to this picture, total amount converted in this picture is 10,000 joules. That would be the primary production. And so if you look at the globe, if you look at the globe, um, you can tell the global energy budget this is the amount of energy that's available to the entire Earth. Where is most of that energy being captured? Well, where is the most sun? On the equator. So you have all these you have lots of energy being captured around the equator, very little up here near the poles. This area where we live, dense forests, and so lots of energy being captured here, less and less here in the mountains. You can kind of tell what's going on. And then as you get further north and further south, you have almost no energy being captured because there aren't any plants, and it's just kind of all bouncing back. And so the gross primary production then is the amount of chemical energy produced before any of those autotrophic organisms that made it or by any of those autotrophic organisms that made it over a certain period of time. And so let's say that the Earth in 1 year produces around 170 billion tons of sugar. That's an estimate, but that's about what has been estimated: 170 billion tons of sugar produced by all the plant life on Earth. And so that would be the gross primary production. Well, then you have this concept of the net primary production. Well, what is the net? Is kind of like, once you get paid $500 in your paycheck or whatever, you take out $150 for taxes and whatever else, and what you have left is $350. That is your net pay. Your gross was 500, then your net pay is 350 because they took out whatever. And so the net primary productivity, the NPP, is what's left over after self-preservation takes place: cellular respiration, homeostasis, growth, repair. And about what percent is this typically? About 90% is taken, so about 10% is left over. And so, real simple equation that you can use to do this is that the net primary productivity equals the gross primary productivity minus R, which is the amount that has been used. All right. Typically, one way that they can figure this is by looking at the biomass of an organism. The biomass is the not weight, the dry mass of an organism. And literally, like if an organism is completely dehydrated, what you have left is just a bunch of proteins and different molecules, and that mass is what has been used over time, what has been converted from the chemical energy from the sun into whatever it takes to build an organism: bones, muscles, that sort of thing. All right, so another concept with ecosystems is this concept of eutrophication. And eutrophication is literally the idea that oxygen is being choked off from a particular body of water, usually because of algae covering the surface of the lake or the pond. You've probably seen this. You can kind of see this. This picture's not very good, but you kind of see this here around the edges here. That is a layer of algae that's covering the pond. Well, some people may look at that and think, okay, that's great. Well, what happens is the sunlight is not able to get to the water. Well, what's going on in the water? Well, you have these little phytoplankton that need the sun to eat. Well, the phytoplankton feed the little fish, and the little fish feed the big fish, and so forth. And so what ends up happening to the ecosystem is it dies off. No oxygen is released into the water because photosynthesis is not happening. The fish suffocate, and the lake dies. The only thing that's alive is the algae that lives on the top. And so this can happen naturally for a number of different reasons. Typically, what you see is this idea of cultural eutrophication. Cultural eutrophication, which is more of a man-made eutrophication, whereas sewer is being dumped into the water. Fertilizers, think like phosphorus, nitrogen, fertilizers. Plants just eat that stuff up. Algae do too, for that matter. They're being put into a body of water, maybe because of runoff from a field, or in the case of some places in Ken Lake where people just dump their sewage right into the open water. Well, of course, the algae love that stuff for whatever reason. They eat it up, they cover the surface of the lake, it kills the lake. Several portions of our own lake at Ken Lake are dead because of this kind of thing. And so this lady here that I featured, Rachel Carson, she wrote a book called Silent Spring. It's actually pretty popular read. and she talks about this problem of cultural eutrophication, the effects on the environment. Written in the 60s, but still an important book for today to understand what's going on in the environment. And so a little bit more about this idea of production efficiency, how this works. This is the picture I was looking for earlier. Production efficiency is a comparison between the amounts used for cellular respiration, which is this is the production of ATP from glucose of cellular respiration versus the amount that's turned into biomass for the new organism, like growth, repair, that sort of thing. All right. And so the production efficiency is how to get the production efficiency is to divide the secondary production, the biomass here, by the net assimilation of all the energy used and stored, which in this case would be here, actually. Yeah, used and stored. So 100, because we lose 100 for caterpillar poop, right? And so in this case, would be about 33% efficient. Um, that's pretty good. Insects have among the highest efficiency. Birds typically exist around 1 to 3% efficiency. They use a ton of energy for cellular respiration. They are constantly eating. Birds are, in order to keep themselves alive. They're small. Think about it. They're small and they use a ton of energy to fly. And so the reason they're small is they don't spend a lot of energy to grow. They're constantly using their energy to like keep their heart rate up, to keep their temperature up, so that they can live. And so very inefficient. Humans are about 10% efficient, which is, think 10 times more than a bird. And then insects, 40% efficiency. This caterpillar's a little short of his friends. This is why insects are the most abundant organisms on Earth. They're extremely efficient. They use most of their energy towards creating new biomass, which in the case of an insect, are insects very big? No. So what does this new biomass look like? It looks like tons of more insects. And so they reproduce rapidly. There's there's tons of them, and so this is what makes them particularly efficient. So we're going to look at three different ecology pyramids, ecological pyramids. The pyramid of energy, or the pyramid of production. This is one you've seen before. Demonstrates the 10% rule we just talked about of energy. Um, but you can also do this same pyramid with biomass, right? Whereas you have a large portion at the bottom. Usually with biomass and numbers, especially if the bottom is like grass or something, or even trees, both ways it kind of skews. But the rest of it kind of plays out where you have just about 10% left from one group to the next. Here you see the same thing with numbers. All right, so the idea that if you have, I'm just throwing this out there, for every 100 corn pieces, maybe 10 cows can eat that, and then one human can do that, right? Whereas humans, if you feed on vegetables, why is that more efficient? Well, it's more efficient because it's you're skipping the middleman, you're skipping the cows, right? And so I'm not saying that it's better to only eat vegetables. I'm just saying it produces more efficiency because you're getting the energy more directly from the source, as opposed to getting it from the cow, or getting it from the cow to the or from the corn to the cow, then from the cow to you. So it decreases the efficiency. So here's something. This is kind of an upside down version of that, because the plankton are just so much, and you see a ton of these zooplankton, phytoplankton a lot fewer, and so it looks a little more skewed because of the numbers, and because the zooplankton aren't eating as much of the phytoplankton. And so sometimes, again, like I was saying with the trees, you might have one tree in a forest that 60 squirrels live in. Well, the numbers are going to be a little skewed, but that tree weighs, what, 1,000 times as much as 100 squirrels. So the numbers can be a little skewed, but in general, this follows this basic 10% idea.